You're listening to the 40 Thrive Podcast, the show created for women 40 and beyond, ready to shake things up. And now, your host, Jackie McDougall.
Welcome to the 40 Thrive Podcast. Today is the first in our Healthy You series. 4 episodes in October to help you feel your best through the transitions and changes that can happen in life over 40 and beyond. We're just about 90 days out from the new year. Let's not move feeling good to the back burner and leave it for 2020. Now is the time. We're talking simple, effective changes that can drastically increase your quality of life. Today, I talk with Dr. Liz Lyster. She's an OBGYN, best-selling author and speaker, and an expert in perimenopause and menopause. In her private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area, she helps women and men in midlife and beyond to lose weight, have more energy, increase their motivation and drive, and generally feel great. Dr. Liz also walks her own talk. When she turned 50 a few years ago, she celebrated by climbing to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. Today, I talked to Dr. Liz about her new book, Go for Great, Dr. Liz's Guide to Thrive at Every Age. Real quick before we get into our conversation, this episode of the 40 Thrive Podcast is brought to you by Coconut. Coconut is focused on helping you find more opportunities to connect and be intimate with your partner. Their personal care products offer couples increased possibility for pleasure, both functional and fun. Coconut oil and water-based personal lubricants ease physical limitations for a more rewarding experience. Get 10% off your order at coconut.com when you use promo code THRIVE at checkout. That's coconut.com, like coconut without the T. Dr. Liz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Appreciate it.
Let's just dive into this new book, Dr. Liz's Guide to Thrive, which I love, of course, at every age. Why this book now?
This book was originally conceived to be aimed at women and men to explain the change, menopause, perimenopause, what are women going through? However, I did some research and I realized that there's actually quite a few books out there addressed to men. And when I read the reviews, I realized that men aren't reading them.
Yeah, they don't care, right?
Well, it's not that they don't care. They just have a totally different approach to health and wellness than women do. My theory is that we have to be attached to our bodies. You know, when you're a young woman, preteen, and you start dealing with a menstrual period, you don't have any choice. And then we make babies, we deal with babies, we have the kids. We just have a different connection to our bodies. And that's my theory of why women are at least 80% of healthcare consumers and also book buyers.
Did you discover anything surprising while doing research for this book?
That's a wonderful question. Honestly, I continue to be surprised at how much women need this information, especially from a doctor. I really am surprised that I keep being surprised by how badly regular doctors interact with women about these topics. They say things that are just wrong. They say things like, oh, you're in your 30s and 40s, you're not sleeping well, your mood is not great, so let's give you sleeping pills and antidepressants. Well, guess what? There's a hormonal piece to it, and even people's gynecologists don't address it with them. That continues to surprise me.
I have been there, with doctors who sort of write you off as like, sorry, you're at this age, so you're done. Like there's an expiration date or something. Hormones, we could sit here and talk for hours, and at the end of it, I could be like, I don't even know what I just heard. So let's break it down to the simplest terms for the listeners, because I think we're either getting overload on information and what's actually happening, this and that and the other thing, and it can get confusing. Let's break it down in a way that my audience understands like what's happening to their bodies over 40. And then I love in chapter 3, and I cannot wait for everyone to get this book, you bust a lot of myths around hormones. So let's first define like what are hormones and what are they doing?
Excellent. All right. I love to start at that point because I call hormones the H word. It's amazing how many people's kind of eyes roll up in their head when they hear the word hormones. They think danger, or they think just all kinds of crazy things, or they just get flashbacks from high school biology class and they just kind of check out. Hormones are simply messengers coursing through our bodies all the time, from our brain all the way down, from our head all the way down to our toes, in our gut. Our gut actually makes hormones. It's involved in that whole process. When we talk about having a gut feeling, that's real. Okay. So another way that I say it is that hormones are the chemistry of our emotions.
Okay, so when we are over 40 and we start to head into perimenopause, what's happening to our bodies with our hormones?
Okay, excellent. Love that question. And I'm really excited because this new book has a beautiful graph that shows what I'm about to tell you. Picture these these levels of these hormones, and they're declining as we get older. That is what happens to us all. Okay, that's not the bad part. Okay, the sort of peaks around age 20, kind of in our early 20s. Remember early 20s, we can pull all-nighters and do whatever you did, eat whatever you ate, drink whatever you had to drink, and the next day you can function pretty fine.
Yes, those days are very long gone.
Yeah, so that was then, and that was this really what I call vigorous hormonal environment. So then we get to really our 30s, and in women, progesterone starts to go down even as early as our 30s, which impacts how we feel. Progesterone helps anxiety, and it calms the brain, it helps with sleep. So that can start to get a little iffy. And then in our 40s, the estrogen levels can start to get a little fluctuating, a little up and down. Like you said, there's so much information out there. It really can get not just confusing, but overwhelming.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the major ones. And then we have these other hormones that I talk about in the book, things like that women either don't realize that we have or don't know a lot about. Even some doctors don't know a lot about it, such as testosterone in women, one of my favorite topics. DHEA is an adrenal hormone, and we live such stressful lives now. Those levels decline kind of steadily.
Okay.
And then we get in the neighborhood of age 50, 51 is the average age in the US where women actually go into menopause and stop having their period. And what happens at that point is it looks like this. Up and down, up and down. I call it the stock market phase.
Is that when a person maybe doesn't have a period for multiple months or things like that?
Yes, exactly. The period starts to act up a little bit. It might just get a little irregular. And eventually it starts to move further apart. That's what you're talking about. Then there's the menopause transition, yet another phrase to kind of toss in there. And that's when the period is really starting to make its exit. But that can take up to a couple of years.
Wow.
Yes.
One of the things about being the host of the 40 Thrive podcast, I like to use my personal experiences and understand what women are going through. But for me, I had a hysterectomy at 35. And so I went from like post baby body to menopause at 35. So I've been there, but it's been years. And so I don't really understand myself what many of the women around me are going through. So let's just break down, like, what kinds of real life situations do we see ourselves in when our hormones are changing? I mean, I know a lot of women are like, I feel like I'm going crazy, basically.
Right, exactly. There are so many, but here's kind of the short list. There's the ones that people know about are hot flashes and night sweats, which also can in turn disrupt sleep, therefore also feeling tired. This also impacts metabolism and weight. Women say, I'm doing everything the same. I'm exercising the same, eating the same, and I'm putting on weight. Vaginal dryness and discomfort with sex can go along with that. Sometimes a woman might have enough estrogen where she's not having too much of the hot flash, night sweat types of symptoms, but there's not enough getting to the vaginal tissues, which also affects the bladder. A lot of women don't realize that connection. The vagina is right next to the bladder and responds to estrogen. So women who were fine before all of a sudden can have a little bit of urine leakage. Those are kind of the main ones. Hair can be affected. The texture can change. Some hair loss. Those are the major ones. Loss of libido, goes along with all of that. Mood disruption, people saying, look, they're the same children. They're the same. I know that it's me that has a shorter fuse. That's the phrase that my patients use with me.
Right. Although the children can be monsters, let's be honest.
Oh, heck yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about some of the myths around hormones. So, number one, when a doctor says, especially a general practitioner who maybe isn't as specialized in hormones, says, yes, these are all your symptoms, but there's nothing you can do about it. That is incorrect. Correct?
Correct. The doctor is incorrect, especially if they use the J word, just. You just have to accept it, or you just have to live with it. Then you kind of move on to another doctor, because that's not true.
So do you believe that your traditional OBGYN would be more knowledgeable, or do you really have to find someone who specializes in hormones?
Great question. Usually GYN doctors are more knowledgeable than regular primary care doctors. That's step one. So if a regular doctor does any type of evaluation and says, oh, everything's fine, but it's not, the next step is the gynecologist. If you started there, I would say the most common mistake that I hear from gynecologists is that they tell a woman, for example, in her 40s, if she still has her menstrual period, that she can't have anything that's caused by hormonal imbalance.
So if she has her period, she cannot have an actual hormonal imbalance.
Right. They just kind of forget about this 10 to 12 year period of time called perimenopause.
Right, because there are some doctors who don't even believe necessarily that perimenopause is a thing. I wish my audience right now could see your face.
I'm a little gobsmacked, but yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, what do you say to that? So perimenopause is real.
Absolutely. And I think it's getting earlier with all the stressors that we're under.
So our hormones are not necessarily all impacted by our age, but also our lifestyle. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Can you give me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So women ask me this all the time. They say, can I help my hormones with lifestyle choices and natural approaches? And the answer is absolutely yes. I'm seeing a lot more and more in my practice, women who eat well and do some basic level of exercise having blood sugar issues. So I know that something's changing in our environment. So that absolutely lifestyle changes impact how our body goes into these hormonal changes and how it handles these hormonal changes. No question about it.
But not everything can be necessarily addressed by just lifestyle changes.
I don't think so. Eventually the ovaries do retire. You went through an abrupt, what we call surgical menopause. Most women go through the more typical gradual changes, but then of course the not so gradual stock market phase before going completely through the change into menopause. And the ovaries retire. So average age 51 in the US. And as I like to point out, and I definitely talk about this in the book, a couple hundred years ago, only 5% of women reached age 50.
Wow.
Okay.
5%.
Yeah, 5%. And then 100 years ago, it was only 50%.
Wow.
And now half of us can expect to live into our mid 80s on average.
Right.
Right. So this is what I call a modern problem. We have a modern problem. And we don't want to just picture 200 years ago, a woman who reached, let's say, age 60. She wasn't working, traveling around, doing all the things that we as women want to do now with our last, third or half of our life.
Right. That's such a good point. So it's interesting that because we have more time due to, in some circumstances, modern medicine, but yet we're afraid to turn to modern medicine to help us through those years. So let's bust some of these myths that you have in your book. So you talk about hormone therapy, and that myth number one is hormone therapy is dangerous.
I tell you, I wrote an entire chapter, one of the bestseller anthologies that I was part of last year. That was my contributing chapter, The Truth About Hormones. That's it. If I could leave everyone with just the one message, oh my goodness. The bottom line is that in 2002, a very large study released results that they reported as hormones increase the risk of breast cancer. That conclusion is still actively in circulation. It's actively in the minds of most doctors. And what we now know, Jackie, is that the hormones they used in that study and the women that were participants in that study and the way that they took the hormones all made those results not apply to us. The number one point being that they didn't use bioidentical progesterone. That's it. That's where the excess 4 women out of 10,000 who got breast cancer in that study. That was it. 4 out of 10,000 additional cases of breast cancer. But it was such a large study that had enough to reach what they call statistical significance because of the non-bioidentical progestin that they used. That's it.
Well, what is the difference? I mean, we hear that all the time. We see celebrities like pushing their books of bioidentical hormones and this and that. What does that actually mean?
It's very simple. All it means is the way the word sounds, bioidentical. It means that the form of the molecule of the hormone that you're replenishing into your body is the same or almost exactly the same as what your body used to make enough of.
So does that mean a certain type of hormone that they use versus like another chemistry?
Yes, that's exactly right. So in that Women's Health Initiative study that got hormones in such trouble, they used a synthetic, non-bioidentical progestin, okay, that manipulates the brain into thinking that it's like progesterone, but it's not the same as what ovaries make.
Oh, is that something that people can still get, this synthetic one?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
So it's not about taking the progesterone, it's about taking not a synthetic one.
Exactly. I like to stick to the term bioidentical, okay, versus non-bioidentical.
But when you say bioidentical, I think a lot of people automatically assume it means like they're going to test my body and then they're going to create a little concoction that is identical to what I'm missing personally. But that's not what you're saying.
That is related. That is related. That's not exactly what I'm saying right now. I'm just talking about the actual hormone.
Okay.
So for example, it can come from a plant. It could be plant derived and it can be bioidentical.
I see.
As opposed to the other hormone that they used in that study. It's called Premarin, and it comes from pregnant mare's urine. It comes from horses.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's why I stay away from natural or synthetic. I mean, that's pretty natural. That's nature, to come from horses' urine, aside from the ethics of that, which is another problem. But the hormone itself looks nothing like human estrogen. That would be non-bioidentical.
So when one of my listeners is at their doctor's office and they understand now what bioidentical means, are there doctors who are trying to prescribe this synthetic version instead of the bioidentical one? And why?
Well, there's a bigger picture where doctors are still afraid of hormones and not helping women feel better while they're going through all these hormonal changes. So they kind of stay away from hormones completely. There definitely still are prescriptions being written for these non-bioidentical forms of the hormones, unfortunately.
And so how do you know? You just have to ask your doctor if it is or not.
Yes. And this is also why I put out my books and my blogs, to try to make it as simple as possible for women to know exactly what to ask for. In my first book, I have a little chart. So now that we're having this conversation, I'm making a note to myself. I will make sure that I have a chart on my website that people can print.
Absolutely. And I will include all the links to your books and your charts and all the good stuff in the show notes as well.
Awesome. Thank you. It's just about empowering people as much as we can with the knowledge to be able to be the tail that wags the dog. I talk about that in Go for Great.
So another myth I want to tackle is if I take hormones, I'll be stuck taking them forever.
This is the first question I usually get asked. If I have someone, they've already come to me, they already know they're not feeling well, they already know hormones will help them feel better, but they're worried, does using any type of hormone replenishment mean that they're stuck forever taking hormones? So it's usually the first question that we tackle. The answer is that no, using hormone therapy to feel better does not mean that you're stuck taking it forever. That's my first answer.
Okay.
My longer answer is that I personally plan to take at least a little bit of estrogen forever, for the rest of my life. The data is so overwhelmingly in favor of the health benefits of estrogen replenishment for women, for our brains, for our bodies, cognition. We want to have our wits about us. We don't want to get older and be less clear and able to do well in our lives.
Right.
Bone density. That's the number one reason that I personally will be on at least a little bit of estrogen forever, no matter what happens, to preserve my bones, because the hip fractures are absolutely devastating.
Right. Is estrogen like progesterone in that there are options that are bioidentical and then some that are not?
Correct. That's exactly right. Again, if I'm going to now have two major points, they're going to be these. Progesterone has to be bioidentical. That's the most important in terms of breast health and not increasing, maybe even lowering the risk of breast cancer. Then for estrogen, what matters is that it go through the skin, right? It could be topical, it can be a gel, a cream, a patch, it could be hormone pellets that go under the skin. All of those different forms bypass what we call the first pass effect on the liver. When you take something orally, it goes from the stomach right over to your liver. And what estrogen does is it stimulates clotting factors. And that's why in that 2002 study, women, they were given oral estrogen and they had increased risk of heart attacks, strokes, these types of clots in the body. Okay, that's of course not anything that anybody wants to have. And that we now know there are many other studies in major journals, major cardiology related journals, that demonstrate that when the estrogen goes through the skin, that risk is not increased over a sugar pill.
Wow, that's fascinating. So when you take estrogen through a gel or something on the skin, you do not have the same risks as if you took estrogen orally.
Exactly.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I understood that.
You got it. You got it.
Wow.
Exactly right. One more important piece about this, and this might shock you, might shock your listeners. In that big study from 2002 that got hormones in so much trouble, what most people don't know, including most doctors, is that 3 years later, in 2005, they published data on, there was another arm of the study with women who were either given only estrogen because they had had hysterectomies. So they were either given estrogen or a sugar pill. And who had less breast cancer? The women on estrogen.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. I mean, I remember when I had my hysterectomy, I mean, what they were taking out, well, they needed to take out my ovaries basically for the BRCA. I'm BRCA1 positive. And one of the things, the reason that they took out my uterus was because they didn't want to give me progesterone as a replacement because of the breast cancer risk. At least that's what they were saying at the time. That was 2006. If I were going into that now in 2019, that would not be the decision then. Is that true?
That's a very interesting question. That would be true for doctors who are really up to speed with the literature.
Okay. And, and I don't necessarily need this to be all about my hysterectomy, but I know that I'm not the only one. I've had listeners reach out to me and go, oh my gosh, I understand. And so one of the things that I say, I let people, oh, I've been through that or whatever. But one of the myths you have is that number 3, you say, I'm done with menopause. So are you saying I'm not actually, because I don't feel like I'm done. So do we ever finish? Like, are we ever done with menopause?
Here's what the data shows. I want to talk 1 minute about the data and 1 minute about the terminology. women who have symptoms related to menopause and use hormone replenishment to feel better, if they go off of their hormones, about half of them will have symptoms again. And that's a huge proportion. All right. So this is kind of also to the question of how long do we need the hormone replenishment? But that's still individual. It's still case by case. Okay. We don't have to treat an individual person as a whole group of people. We can just take women one at a time. What I mean by that is the way I use the terminology. Right? So menopause and postmenopause, I use those words interchangeably.
Okay.
All right. And once a woman is in menopause, that's it. We now have a new set of parameters in our bodies, new set of hormonal challenges to navigate for the rest of our lives.
I feel like there is that message that once you're past menopause, or a few years later, like now you just have to deal with it. So you're saying we can continue to take hormone replacement for years. Obviously, talk to your doctor, people.
Yes.
And that we don't have to just suffer through, if we decide to try to go off and we still have these symptoms, like it's okay.
Exactly. I love how you just said it. And you said that we don't just have to suffer because, like we were saying earlier, I'm going to have a graphic made of the word just with a circle around it and a line through it so that people just know. If people just had that in their pocket going to the doctor, if that doctor says anything like you just have to accept this, you're just getting older, ooh, no. We want to ban that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I want to talk about two more things. The first of them being sex. So I know that there are some women over 40 who actually find sex to be more enjoyable, they're in the zone, but many, many more who are like, I could go the rest of my life without it and be okay. Does that have to be the case?
Absolutely not. It does not have to be the case. I always take this topic in stages. First of all, if a woman's having any physical issues, if she's having any vaginal dryness, that doesn't mean that the surface is dry. It means that the elasticity underneath is decreased. It's kind of like I was cleaning my closet the other day and I reached down behind something and I found an old pair of leggings and I went to try them on and the elastic just kind of like came apart in my hands.
Yes.
I think a lot of us have had that experience. That's what I mean by loss of elasticity. So it's really more than just the surface being dry. Okay. And it's normal to not want to do something that hurts. So that's always step number one, is make sure that the body's in good shape, in better shape. And by the way, even for women who are afraid of hormone therapy and they need to kind of work with me for a longer time or read more to develop a comfort level, the amount of estrogen that helps the vagina and the bladder is not enough to help hot flashes. So women can really feel comfortable. And there's a lot of doctors are understanding this part of the data. Okay. Even my mom, who had breast cancer in her late 60s, finally they were able to give her vaginal estrogen back. Okay. To be able to use because she was having bladder issues. So even her oncologist gave it the go ahead quite a few years after the cancer, but at least she was able to regain that comfort. So that's the first part of libido, right? It's normal to not want to do something that hurts.
Right.
Then there's so many other issues. A lot of women our age now, us included, have teenagers in the house. We're dealing with hormones at the teenage and our hormones and our spouse or our partner. And this is also a huge challenge, right? We have to be sleeping. It's hard to have a healthy sex drive if you're feeling exhausted.
Absolutely.
You can't have good libido on caffeine.
As much as we try.
Right. And then there's, of course, all the impact of hormones on the brain and the interaction with oxytocin, the bonding hormone. The bonding hormone works better when there's good estrogen levels.
Right. I want my listeners to be able to go out feeling empowered, to find a doctor, to discuss these things, to give them a little bit of, we're just scratching the surface here. Your books will be, like I said, I'll link to them in the show notes. They'll be extremely helpful. Your chart will be extremely helpful. I know that you contribute to your blog and you're constantly sharing so much amazing information. But I would love to know, say I'm going into my OBGYN and I'm going into your office, what kinds of questions should I be asking to know that you're the right doctor for me and that we'll be going in the right direction in regards to hormones?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of doctors' egos. Most doctors understand that Google is here to stay. I remember when it started and doctors were very offended that people were researching anywhere else other than asking their doctor.
Right.
So are they familiar? What's their understanding of the term bioidentical? That's a good place to start. I would say simply for the progesterone, there's one pharmaceutical progesterone that's bioidentical, and it normally goes under the trade name Prometrium. This is going to be on the chart that I'll have.
Okay.
All right. And so that's pretty much it. But if the doctor writes progesterone, it will be bioidentical because there's a lot of generics now. And the other is to just ask the doctor, what types of estrogen therapies do you like? What do you recommend? Keeping in mind that it is better from a health standpoint if it's an option that is through the skin. It's pretty simple. Pretty
Right.
simple. Another question is, at what age will they order a bone density scan? Doctors who are willing to order a bone scan on women at younger ages, I like those doctors better.
Because they want to catch it or at least get a baseline, right?
Exactly. It's very important to go kind of prepared and just also have prepared your questions for the doctor ahead of time. Even when I go to my doctor, I kind of get caught up. I mean, when you're on the receiving end of a pelvic exam, if you don't have something written down, it's probably going to go by the wayside. That way you can use the little bit of time that your doctor has to spend with you.
That's a great point. So as far as the estrogen that goes on the skin, do you have a specific one that you prescribe?
I prescribe all kinds of different ones at this point. I'm just working with a doctor in Florida. He developed an organic oil base for estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And I'm just getting up to speed with him to help him with some of his patients. So that's just another option. I just like options. I like options for women, either a patch from a regular pharmacy or a gel from a regular pharmacy, or a compounding pharmacy can make a gel, a cream. There's all kinds of different approaches and formulations.
Is it the compounding pharmacy that determines what that gel or cream looks like, or is it the doctor?
The doctor determines the strength
Okay.
and how much of the hormone will go in there. And that's the beauty of it, is it can be really tailored to the individual patient. The pharmacy is usually, especially compounding pharmacies, they tend to really care about quality and effectiveness for the patient. And they tend to work really nicely with my patients to make sure that they're feeling better. So they're kind of my partners in it. And it's usually just individual preference. Some people prefer a cream versus a gel versus the oil. There's a lot of ways to do it. So at this point in time, I don't have a strong preference of one over the other. It just depends how we're getting started and then what steps we take, depending on how an individual person responds.
Right. So it's more important to find the right doctor who can work with you and sort of play and experiment a little bit until you find the right concoction.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, I just appreciate your time. I, again, cannot wait to get the book. I'm going to link to that in the show notes. But I mean, I think even 10 years ago, you wrote your easy guide to menopause, 5 simple steps to balancing your hormones and feeling like yourself again. A lot can change in 10 years in the medical community. Do you feel like that book is still something people should be grabbing as well?
I do. I actually do. Everybody that becomes my patient gets that book. I go back through that book from time to time and make sure that everything's still applicable. And I'm happy and proud to say that it really is. Everything you and I talked about today, I cover in that book. I go into a little more detail about the various hormones, a little bit more about the testosterone, the confidence hormone for women, DHEA, which helps with libido, all these kinds of details. I go into that more. And then Go for Great, I kind of build on that.
Right.
GREAT is a 5-step formula, the GREAT, that's a clue for everyone. That's a formula for what to keep in mind as you move forward in order to work effectively with your doctor and other practitioners that you are working with in order to feel great.
Awesome. So you are still taking patients as well, though, up in your Northern California office? I know people are going to be like, okay, I'll get on a plane today and go check you out.
Absolutely. Yeah, that happens. I have people, my office is not too far from the San Francisco airport. So people do come in, but people also drive in around California. I take care of patients virtually as well.
Wow. Oh, you do?
I do.
How do you do that?
I'm working to build that up, that part of the practice. Zoom is so great. We love Zoom. It works really well. I can record it. The patient can have a recording. They just have to do a few extra steps to make sure that I have some vital signs on them from a doctor before we do the consultation. But I start with everybody on the phone. That's always a starting place. The health history review, determine if we're a good fit to work together. I want to make sure people have used up their options. I want people to be able to work with their regular doctors. And if they get what they need, then fantastic. And then if they're not getting what they need, then I can help.
That's great. I mean, I think that just this little bit of information has cleared up a lot for me, and I'm sure that it will for my listeners as well. And like I said, I will link to all of the great things, and I'm excited for the chart. I want to see the chart. And, I think the message, I don't want it to get lost in this, is that you don't have to feel bad. You can actually feel good while going through perimenopause and menopause.
Exactly. I want everyone to reject the J word and not just get told that they're just getting older. And I don't want them to settle. I want them to go for great.
And I think that you're giving so much hope with that great. The better we feel physically, the more we can go out and just kill it in life.
Yes, absolutely.
Dr. Liz, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked today's episode, please share it with a friend. There are way too many women suffering in silence out there. You could help someone take back her life just with the simple act of sharing. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never have to search for an episode again. It'll just pop up automatically in your favorite podcast app. Until next time, take care and keep thriving.
Thank you.